I was on a video call with my fiancée's parents discussing wedding logistics. We'd been going through the usual checklist, venue, caterers, guest list, when her father cleared his throat in that particular way that signals something non-negotiable is about to be announced. "You need to pay for her parents' flights," he said, his tone even and certain. "It's tradition." Not a question, not a request for consideration, a statement of fact delivered like he was reading from some ancient wedding manual that everyone should just know by heart. My fiancée glanced at me nervously. Her mother nodded in agreement, adding nothing but silent solidarity to the declaration. The expectation hung in the air, waiting for my compliance. I could have asked questions, I could have pushed back, discussed budgets, mentioned that we were already stretching our finances thin with the venue deposit and everything else. I could have pointed out that tradition varies wildly depending on who you ask and where you're from. Instead, I kept my expression neutral and replied simply, "I'll take care of it." Her father smiled, satisfied. Her mother relaxed. My fiancé looked relieved that I hadn't started an argument. The call wrapped up shortly after, with everyone seemingly happy with how things had gone. I closed my laptop and immediately opened a new browser tab. The airline booking page began to load. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. Let me give you some context about my relationship with my future in-laws. From the moment my fiancée introduced me to her parents, I noticed a pattern. They had very specific ideas about how things should be done, and those ideas always seemed to involve other people, specifically me, footing the bill or making accommodations. When we announced our engagement, her mother immediately started planning. Not suggesting, not discussing, planning. The guest list ballooned from our initial idea of 75 people to over 150, most of them her parents' friends and distant relatives I'd never met. When I gently mentioned the increased cost, her father waved it off with, "You only get married once. You want it to be memorable?" Memorable for whom? I wondered, but didn't ask. Then came the venue selection. My fiancé and I had found a beautiful garden venue that fit our budget and our vision. Intimate, natural, unpretentious. Her mother took one look at the photos and declared it too casual for a proper wedding. She found a country club instead, with marble columns and crystal chandeliers and a price tag that made my stomach drop. When I hesitated, her father put his hand on my shoulder and said, "This is what's expected. You understand." I was starting to understand something, but it wasn't what he thought. There was the engagement party her parents insisted on hosting, except hosting turned out to mean organizing while I quietly picked up the bar tab. There was the assumption that I'd hire a videographer because you'll want to remember this forever, even though neither my fiancé nor I particularly cared about having a wedding video. There was the expectation that we'd do a formal church ceremony at their parish, despite neither of us being particularly religious. Every single time, the script was the same. They would express what should happen, frame it as tradition or expectation or what's normally done, and then wait for me to make it happen. No discussion of cost, no consideration of what I might want or what made sense for us as a couple, just the assumption that I would provide. My fiancée, to her credit, wasn't actively pushing these things, but she also wasn't pushing back. She'd grown up with parents who had strong opinions and the expectation of compliance, and somewhere along the way, she'd learned it was easier to go along than to fight. When I'd express concern about costs or voice a different preference, she'd give me this apologetic look and say, "I know, but it's important to them. Can we just do this one thing?" Except it was never just one thing. I'd tried to set boundaries before. I'd tried the reasonable approach, explaining our budget, suggesting compromises, asking to be included in decisions that affected me financially. Every time, I was met with a combination of hurt feelings, subtle guilt trips, and the unspoken suggestion that I was being difficult or cheap or somehow failing to live up to what a good son-in-law should be. So when her father announced that I needed to pay for their flights as tradition, I recognized it immediately for what it was. Another line item in a bill I was expected to pay without question, another expectation I was supposed to meet without negotiation. The word tradition had become a weapon in their vocabulary. It was the trump card they played whenever they wanted something done their way, on their terms, at my expense. Tradition dictated the venue. Tradition dictated the guest count. Tradition dictated the ceremony structure, the reception timeline, the whole carefully choreographed performance that had increasingly little to do with what my fiancé and I actually wanted for our wedding. And now, tradition dictated that I buy their plane tickets. I realized something in that moment. I was tired of arguing. I was tired of explaining. I was tired of being made to feel like I was violating some sacred code every time I questioned an expense or suggested an alternative. But I also realized something else. They'd made a critical error. They'd given me an instruction without specifications. They'd told me what to do without telling me how to do it. Tradition might be the word they used to justify their demands, but tradition is just a polite term for entitlement when it's wielded the way they were wielding it. And I'd decided I was done filling in all the gaps with my wallet and my compliance. So when I said, I'll take care of it, I meant exactly that. I would take care of it. On my terms. Following their request to the letter, but not 1 inch beyond. After the call ended, I sat at my desk for a few minutes, thinking through my options. I could confront them directly, have the uncomfortable conversation about boundaries and expectations and how their demands were becoming unsustainable. But I'd tried versions of that before, and it always ended the same way, with me painted as the unreasonable one, the outsider who didn't understand how things are done, the son-in-law who wasn't generous enough or gracious enough or committed enough to their daughter. I could go to my fiancée first, ask her to talk to her parents, to advocate for us as a couple, but that would put her in the middle, and I knew from experience that she struggled to stand up to them. It would create stress for her without necessarily changing anything, or I could do exactly what they asked. Nothing more, nothing less. The beauty of their demand was its simplicity. Pay for her parents' flights. 5 words. A clear instruction. They wanted me to purchase airline tickets for them to attend our wedding. What they hadn't specified was any of the details that actually matter when booking air travel. They hadn't mentioned cabin class, they hadn't discussed routing or connections, they hadn't specified departure times or dates beyond the general wedding weekend. They hadn't requested refundable tickets or travel insurance or seat selection or any of the dozens of other variables that distinguish a premium travel experience from a basic one. They'd simply assumed, as they always assumed, that I would intuit not just what they asked for, but what they expected beyond what they asked for. That I would read between the lines and provide not just the service, but the luxury, not just the ticket, but the comfort, the flexibility, the first-class treatment they felt they deserved. I pulled up the airline website and began searching for flights. My in-laws lived about 1,500 miles away, a solid 3-hour flight. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in late spring, which meant traveling on a Friday and returning on a Sunday. Prime travel days, which meant higher prices even for basic economy. I found a flight that worked, departing early Friday morning, arriving late morning, a single connection through a major hub, total travel time about 5 hours with the layover. Return flight on Sunday afternoon, also with 1 connection. No frills, no premium routing, no extra legroom. Economy class, the cheapest fare available, non-refundable, non-changeable, without a substantial fee. I selected 2 tickets. I entered their names exactly as they appeared on their IDs. I chose the most basic seats available, middle and aisle in different rows, because that's what was left at that price point. No priority boarding, no checked bag included beyond the standard allowance, no lounge access, no meal selection beyond whatever the airline offered to everyone. The total came to a number that was still more than I wanted to spend, but it was within the realm of reasonable. It was what a person actually asked to pay for flights would pay, rather than what someone expected to be treated to a luxury experience would expect. I reviewed the booking one final time. Everything was in order. The flights would get them there and back. The times were inconvenient but not unreasonable. The connections were tight but manageable. It was exactly what they'd asked for. Transportation. I entered my credit card information and completed the purchase. The confirmation email arrived instantly. I forwarded it to them with a brief message. Your flights are booked. See you at the wedding. Looking forward to celebrating together. Professional. Warm. Completely factual. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a small smile. I hadn't refused their demand. I hadn't argued or negotiated or explained. I had simply taken them at their word and delivered exactly what they requested. If they'd wanted something more, they should have asked for something more. The confirmation email I forwarded was a standard airline booking receipt, the kind everyone gets when they purchase tickets online. It was thorough, detailed, and completely unambiguous. At the top, their names, the confirmation code, the booking reference number. Below that, the complete flight itinerary. Departure city, arrival city, flight numbers, aircraft type. The Friday morning departure at 6:15 a.m., requiring them to arrive at the airport by 4:15 a.m. to clear security. The 3-hour layover in Dallas, the final leg arriving at 11:47 a.m. The return journey, Sunday departure at 2:30 p.m. Another connection, arrival back home at 9:53 p.m. Then the fare details. Economy class, basic economy. In clear, unambiguous text. No upgrades, no additional purchases, no seat selection beyond what was automatically assigned. The total cost was listed plainly. $847, $50 for both tickets, including taxes and fees. And then, in the highlighted box that airlines always use for these notices, changes not permitted. Tickets are non-refundable. Name changes not allowed. Cancellations will not receive a refund. Date or time changes subject to change fee of $200 per ticket plus any fare difference. It was all there, spelled out in the kind of corporate clarity that airlines have perfected to protect themselves from liability. Every limitation, every restriction, every consequence of choosing the cheapest fare was documented. I didn't editorialize. I didn't add commentary or explanation. I simply forwarded the email exactly as I'd received it, with that brief note about looking forward to celebrating together. To anyone reading it objectively, it was a perfectly considerate gesture. I'd taken care of the travel arrangements as requested. I'd sent confirmation well in advance, giving them plenty of time to plan around the flight times. I'd handled the logistics so they didn't have to, but to someone who had expected something very different, someone who had assumed that pay for our flights meant provide us with a premium travel experience, that email was full of unwelcome surprises. The 6:15 a.m. departure meant they'd need to leave their house around 3:30 a.m. The connection added hours to their travel time instead of a direct flight they might have expected. The basic economy seats meant no advanced seat selection, no carry-on beyond a personal item, no flexibility if plans changed. And that non-refundable notice meant that every one of those details was now locked in. I knew what was coming. I'd been in enough interactions with my in-laws to predict their response. But I'd also positioned myself perfectly. I'd done exactly what they asked. Not what they wanted, necessarily, but what they asked. And that distinction, I was about to learn, mattered quite a bit to them. The response came faster than I expected. Less than 40 minutes after I sent the confirmation, my phone rang. My future mother-in-law's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice pleasant and unsuspecting. "Hi, did you get the flight confirmation?" "We got it." Her tone was tight, controlled in that way that signals barely suppressed frustration. "We need to talk about the details." "Of course," I said. "What's on your mind?" "Well," a pause. I could hear her gathering herself, trying to find the right approach. "We're grateful that you booked the flights, we are, but we were expecting something a bit different." "Different how?" "These are economy seats, basic economy. Do you know what that means?" "I do," I replied calmly. "It's the standard cabin. That's what I booked." "And the flights have connections, long connections. We'll be traveling for hours." "About 5 hours total each way," I confirmed. "The direct flights were significantly more expensive, and you asked me to pay for the flights, so I found ones that worked within a reasonable budget." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. She was trying to stay calm, to keep this civil. "And they're non-refundable." "That's correct. Most economy tickets are, unless you pay extra for flexibility." "What if something comes up? What if we need to change our plans?" "Then you'd need to pay the change fee plus any difference in fare," I said, keeping my tone informational rather than argumentative. "It's all detailed in the confirmation email." There was a longer pause this time. I heard muffled conversation in the background. She'd covered the phone to talk to her husband. When she came back, her approach had shifted. "Look, we appreciate that you handled this. We do. But when we talked about you paying for our flights, we assumed you understood that we'd need appropriate accommodations. Your father and I aren't young anymore. A 6 a.m. departure with a 3-hour layover in middle seats, that's not acceptable for people our age traveling to their daughter's wedding." There it was, the word that always came up, appropriate. As defined by them, never discussed with me, always assumed. "I understand that early departures aren't ideal," I said. "But you asked me to pay for your flights, and I did. These are the flights I could afford to pay for." "But surely—" "I've already stretched our wedding budget considerably," I continued, keeping my voice even. "The venue your mother preferred over our original choice. The expanded guest list, the videographer, the upgraded floral arrangements, the country club reception instead of the garden party we'd planned. I'm doing my best to accommodate everyone's preferences, but I have limits." Silence on the other end. "You asked me to pay for your flights," I repeated. "I paid for your flights. They'll get you here for the wedding and home afterward. That's what I was able to provide." "This isn't what we expected," she said, her voice now carrying an edge of something close to anger. "I understand," I replied, "but it is what you asked for." More muffled conversation. Then her husband's voice, having taken the phone. "Son, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't think so," I said, still calm. "You said I needed to pay for your flights. I did exactly that." "When we said that, we meant—" "You meant what?" I interrupted gently. "Because what you said was that I needed to pay for your flights. You didn't specify class. You didn't mention direct flights or premium seating or refundable tickets. You stated it as a tradition that I should pay for your flights, and that's what I've done. Obviously, we expected a certain level of what? I asked. Comfort, luxury, flexibility. Those are all upgrades that cost additional money that wasn't discussed in our conversation. You made a statement about tradition, and I followed that tradition by paying for your transportation. That's what tradition actually requires. I could hear him breathing heavily. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. If you're unhappy with the flights, I continued, you're welcome to purchase different tickets yourselves. These tickets will remain available as a backup, or you can let them go unused. But I've fulfilled the obligation you placed on me. I've paid for your flights to your daughter's wedding. Now wait I'm not trying to be difficult, I said, and I meant it. I'm trying to be clear. You set an expectation, and I met it. If that expectation didn't match what you actually wanted, that's not a failure on my part. That's a communication issue on yours. The line went quiet for a long moment. We'll discuss this with our daughter, he finally said. That's your choice, I replied. But the flights are non-refundable, so any changes or alternative arrangements will need to be made at your expense. I'm sure you understand. He hung up without saying goodbye. I set my phone down and realized my hands were shaking slightly, not from fear or regret, but from the adrenaline of finally setting a boundary that might actually hold. The call with my fiancée came that evening. What happened with my parents? She asked immediately. Her voice carried that familiar stress, the sound of someone caught between loyalty to family and loyalty to partner. I explained the situation calmly. Her father's demand, my response, the booking, the specifications, their complaints. They're really upset, she said. My mom said the seats are in the middle of the plane and they have to get up at 3 a.m. That's accurate, I confirmed. Why didn't you book them better flights? Because better flights cost significantly more money, and your father simply said I needed to pay for their flights. He didn't specify what kind of flights. You know what he meant. Do I asked. Because I've learned that what your parents say and what they mean are often two different things, and I'm expected to read their minds and empty my wallet to bridge that gap. She was quiet for a moment. That's not fair, isn't it? Let me ask you something. When your dad said it's tradition for me to pay for their flights, did he mention business class? Did he mention direct flights? Did he mention refundable tickets or premium seats or any specific requirements at all? No, but nothing, I said, more firmly than I'd intended. He stated something as tradition and expected me to comply. I complied. I paid for their flights. What I'm not doing anymore is filling in all the blanks with assumptions about what they really want and how much I'm supposed to spend beyond what they actually ask for. They're my parents. They're traveling across the country for our wedding. And I paid for their travel, exactly as requested. If they wanted luxury travel, that should have been part of the conversation. If they wanted to discuss budget and expectations, we could have done that. But your father didn't want a discussion. He wanted compliance. And he got it. I could hear her frustration building. So this is about making a point? About being stubborn? No, I said quietly. This is about having boundaries. Your parents have been making decisions about our wedding, and expecting me to fund those decisions without question. Every time I've tried to discuss costs or suggest alternatives, I've been shut down with appeals to tradition or what's expected or what's appropriate. I'm done with that dynamic. So you're punishing them? I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply doing exactly what was asked of me, not more, not less. If that feels like punishment to them, that says something about their expectations, not about my behavior. She didn't respond immediately. I could picture her on the other end of the line, torn between the two sides of this conflict. My dad wants to talk to you, she finally said. I'm happy to talk, I replied, but the flights are non-refundable, so there's not much to discuss at this point. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Her father, his voice controlled but cold. Let's talk about this like adults, he began. I agree, I said. What would you like to discuss? You know perfectly well that when I mentioned tradition, I meant you should provide appropriate travel for your future in-laws, not stick us in economy seats with connections at ungodly hours. Where was that specified? I asked. What? Where, in our conversation, did you specify the level of service you expected? Where did you mention cabin class, routing preferences, or any other requirements? It should be obvious. It's not obvious, I interrupted. What's obvious to you, based on your expectations and your experience, is not necessarily obvious to me. You said I needed to pay for your flights. I asked myself, what does that actually require? Transportation. I provided transportation. This is about more than transportation. Is it? Because you said it was tradition for me to pay for your flights, not for me to provide you with a luxury travel experience, not for me to ensure your comfort at whatever cost, to pay for your flights, which I did. You're being deliberately obtuse. I'm being deliberately precise, I corrected, because I've noticed that when things are vague, I'm expected to interpret them in whatever way costs me the most money and gives me the least input, so I've decided to interpret requests literally instead. This is disrespectful. Is it disrespectful to follow instructions exactly as given, or is it disrespectful to place demands on someone without discussion and then complain when they don't exceed those demands? He was silent for a moment, and I realized I'd touched something. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to someone pushing back, asking questions, demanding clarity. Tradition, I continued, is only meaningful when everyone agrees on what it means. You used that word like it was supposed to end the conversation, like I was supposed to nod and comply without question. But tradition varies wildly. In some families, the bride's parents pay for everything. In others, costs are split. In some, the couple pays for their own wedding entirely. You picked the tradition that put the cost on me, stated it as fact, and expected me to accept it. So I did. I accepted your tradition that I should pay for your flights. And I paid for your flights. This isn't... You wanted me to pay for something more than flights, I said. You wanted me to provide an experience. But that's not what you asked for. And I'm tired of being expected to infer, assume, and overspend based on unstated expectations. The silence stretched longer this time. My daughter deserves better than this, he finally said. Your daughter deserves a partner who treats her parents with respect, which I do. She also deserves a partner who doesn't let himself be financially manipulated by people who use tradition as a weapon. I'm being both of those things. You're being... Careful with what you say next, I interrupted, my voice still calm but carrying an edge now. Because I have been nothing but respectful to you and your wife. I have accommodated request after request, absorbed cost after cost, adjusted plan after plan. What I haven't done is argue or complain or make this difficult. I simply booked exactly what you asked for. If you have a problem with that, the problem isn't with me. He hung up. My fiancée texted me 10 minutes later. They want you to rebook the flights in business class. I texted back, the tickets are non-refundable. Any changes are at their expense. Her response came quickly. Are you serious? Completely, I replied. This is what non-refundable means. The next few days were tense. My fiancé's parents tried multiple approaches. First came the guilt. We just want to arrive fresh for our daughter's special day. Then the appeals to reason. You must understand that economy seats are uncomfortable for people our age. Then the subtle threats. We're reconsidering whether we can even make the trip under these circumstances. Each time, my response was the same. I had paid for their flights as requested. The tickets were non-refundable. Any changes or upgrades would need to be handled and paid for by them. The beauty of non-refundable tickets is that they create a kind of economic moat. Every alternative became something they had to pay for, while the original tickets, my expense, sat there as a perfectly functional option. They could let those tickets go unused and book their own flights, but that meant spending their own money. They could pay to upgrade the existing tickets, but that meant change fees plus the fare difference for business class, which on these routes ran into the thousands of dollars. They could pay for direct flights as a new booking, but again, their money. My future mother-in-law called my fiancé daily, sometimes multiple times. Can't he just rebook them? Can't he change them to something reasonable? My fiancé relayed these messages to me, her frustration evident. They're making this such a big deal. They're making it a big deal because they expected something different than what they asked for, I replied. That's not my problem to solve. But you could solve it. You could just pay the change fee and upgrade them. I could, I agreed. I could spend another $2,000 to move them to business class and direct flights. Or they could spend that money themselves, since they're the ones unhappy with the perfectly functional transportation I already provided. Why are you being so stubborn about this? I'm not being stubborn, I'm being consistent. Your parents set a boundary, that I should pay for their flights. I honored that boundary. Now they want to move the boundary, to expand the expectation, and they want me to absorb the cost of their changed expectations. I'm declining to do that. What my fiancée didn't initially understand, what I don't think her parents understood either, was that non-refundable tickets shift the entire power dynamic. Before I booked them, they had leverage. They could make demands, express disappointment, apply pressure. But once those tickets existed, once they were paid for and confirmed and locked in, the leverage disappeared. Now, every alternative was their choice to make and their expense to bear. The original ticket sat there as proof that I had fulfilled the obligation. Anything beyond that was optional, and options cost money. Her father tried one more direct approach about a week before the wedding. He called me from a number I didn't recognize, perhaps thinking I was screening his calls. "We need to resolve this situation," he said. "I think it's already resolved," I replied. "You have tickets. You can use them or not. That's your choice." "Those tickets are unacceptable." "Then don't use them. Book something else." "You know we shouldn't have to pay for our own flights to our daughter's wedding." "You're not paying for flights to your daughter's wedding," I corrected. "You're paying to upgrade the flights I already paid for because you're unsatisfied with the level of service. Those are different things." "This is ridiculous." "Is it? Let me ask you something. If you'd come to me and said, 'We'd love to attend the wedding, but the flights are expensive. Could you help us with business class tickets?' If you'd made it a request instead of a demand, if you'd been specific about what you wanted, if we'd had an actual conversation about it, what do you think I would have said?" He was quiet. "I probably would have found a compromise," I continued. "Maybe not business class, but premium economy. Maybe not direct flights, but better routing. Maybe not fully refundable, but at least changeable. We could have discussed it like adults planning something together, but that's not what happened. You told me what tradition required, expected me to comply without question, and now you're upset that I complied exactly rather than exceeding your unstated expectations. You're making this about pride. I'm making this about respect," I said. "Respect works both ways. You want me to respect tradition, respect your position as her parents, respect your needs? Fine. I also need you to respect my financial limits, respect my right to clarify expectations, and respect the fact that I fulfilled the obligation you placed on me." "The obligation was implied to be—" "Nothing was implied," I interrupted. "You stated something. I delivered it. Everything else is your interpretation of what you assumed I would provide beyond what you asked for. And I'm done being responsible for the gap between what people ask for and what they assume they'll receive." Another long silence. "Are you going to change the tickets?" he finally asked. "No." "Then we'll see you at the wedding," he said stiffly and hung up. The turning point with my fiancée came about 4 days before the wedding. We were going over final details, seating charts, vendor timelines, the usual last-minute logistics that consume the week before a wedding. She'd been quiet most of the evening, tension radiating from her in a way that told me she was building up to something. Finally, she set down the seating chart and looked at me directly. "My mom called again today." "About the flights," I said. Not a question. "About the flights. About how they're stressed and uncomfortable, and this isn't how they expected to start their daughter's wedding weekend." I waited, letting her continue. "She wants to know if you'll reconsider, if you'll help them upgrade, even just pay half of the change fee or something." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd ask you." She paused. "But I already know what you're going to say." "Do you?" "You're going to say no. You're going to say you already paid for their flights and anything else is on them." "That's correct." She nodded slowly like she was processing something. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Always." "Is this about the money, or is this about making a point?" I thought about how to answer that. "It's about both, and it's about neither." She frowned, confused. "It's not about the specific dollar amount," I explained. "I could afford to pay for business class tickets. It would strain our budget, but I could do it. And it's not really about making a point to your parents, although I'll admit there's some satisfaction in finally setting a boundary that holds." "Then what is it about?" "It's about what happens after the wedding," I said. "It's about the next 40 or 50 years of our marriage and how we interact with your parents during that time." She started to object, but I held up a hand. "Listen, your parents have a pattern. They have strong preferences about how things should be done, and they've learned that if they state those preferences as expectations or traditions or requirements, people comply. You've been complying your whole life, and they expected me to comply too. They're not trying to control, maybe not consciously," I interrupted gently. "But look at what's happened with our wedding. How many of the decisions have actually been our decisions versus things they pushed for? The venue, the guest list, the ceremony structure, the reception details. Hell, even what we're serving for dinner went through 3 rounds of their notes." She was quiet, and I could see her mentally reviewing the last 6 months of planning. "Every time I've pushed back, even gently, I've been the difficult one. The one who doesn't understand tradition, who doesn't appreciate what's appropriate, who isn't being generous enough or considerate enough. And you've been caught in the middle, trying to keep everyone happy." "That's not—" "It is," I said firmly but kindly. "And I don't blame you for it. They're your parents. You love them. You don't want conflict. But here's what I realized. If I don't set boundaries now, this pattern continues forever. It's not just about the wedding. It's about every major decision in our life together. She was listening now, really listening. Where we live, whether we rent or buy, what kind of house we get, how we spend holidays, when we have kids, how we raise those kids. Your parents have opinions about all of that, I guarantee it. And if I establish now that their unstated expectations become my obligations, that pattern will define our entire marriage. So the flights are about all of that? The flights are where I chose to draw a line. Your father made a demand and called it tradition. He didn't discuss it with me. He didn't consider my budget or my input. He stated it as fact and expected compliance. And I decided that I was going to comply exactly, literally, rather than filling in all the gaps with my wallet and my acquiescence. She absorbed this for a long moment. They think you're being disrespectful. I know they do, but here's my question. Is it disrespectful to do exactly what someone asks? Or is it disrespectful to place demands on someone without discussion and then complain when they don't exceed those demands? She didn't answer immediately. Your parents are used to people inferring what they really want beyond what they say. They're used to people reading between the lines and providing more than was asked for. And they've confused that behavior, people trying to please them or avoid conflict, with what they're actually entitled to expect. You're saying they're entitled. I'm saying they've developed entitled expectations, I clarified. There's a difference. They're not bad people, but they've learned that stating preferences as requirements works, and nobody has really challenged that before. And you're challenging it. I'm clarifying it, I said. I paid for their flights. That's what was asked. If they wanted something beyond basic transportation, that needed to be part of the conversation. It wasn't, so they got what was asked for, not what was assumed. My fiancée sat with this for a while. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. You didn't embarrass them. I tried not to. You could have made a scene on that first call. You could have argued or told them no outright. You could have sent them a budget breakdown or made them feel cheap for asking, but you didn't. I didn't want to embarrass them. I wanted to be clear with them. She nodded slowly. You just did what they asked. Exactly what they asked. Exactly. And that's why they're so upset. Because they realize they can't say you refused or that you were disrespectful. You just didn't read their minds. Right. She was quiet again, and I could see something shifting in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. They do this to me too, she said quietly. Not with money, but with other things. They'll say they just want me to be happy, but what they mean is they want me to make the choice they've already decided is right. They'll say, it's up to you, but then list all the reasons why there's only one acceptable option. I reached across and took her hand. I know, and I'm not trying to drive a wedge between you and them, but I also can't spend the rest of my life trying to decode what people really want beyond what they say. It's exhausting, and it's not sustainable. So what happens now? Now they make a choice. They use the tickets I bought, or they don't. They pay to upgrade them, or they don't. But either way, they learn that when they make demands of me, I'm going to take them literally. If they want something specific, they need to say it specifically. If they want to discuss options, we can discuss options. But the era of unstated expectations becoming my obligations is over. She squeezed my hand. They're not going to like this new boundary. Probably not. But they'll adjust. People always adjust to boundaries when the boundaries hold. And us? Are we okay? I looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman I was about to marry, caught between her family and her future, trying to navigate loyalties and expectations and the reality that love sometimes requires difficult conversations. We're okay, I said, but I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to hurt your parents. I'm doing this so we can have a marriage where we make our own decisions without constantly managing other people's assumptions. I need you to be okay with that. I need you to support that, even when it's uncomfortable. I'm trying, she said. It's just hard. They're my parents. I know, and they're going to be my in-laws. We'll figure out how to make this work, but it has to start from a place of clear communication and mutual respect, not assumption and obligation. She nodded, and I could see she was processing all of this, integrating it into her understanding of our relationship and her family dynamics. For what it's worth, she said after a moment, I think you did the right thing. I hate that it's causing so much drama, but you did exactly what they asked. They can't really argue with that. They're trying to, I pointed out with a slight smile. They are, but they're losing the argument, and they know it. 2 days before the wedding, my future mother-in-law called my fiancé with a different tone, less demanding, more resigned. We're going to take the flights, she said, the ones he booked. My fiancée relayed this to me with a mixture of relief and residual tension. She wanted me to know they're making the sacrifice for my happiness. Of course they are, I said, without bitterness. They need to frame it in a way that preserves their dignity. That's fine. Let them have that. You're not upset about the guilt trip? No, because they're coming to the wedding and they're using the tickets I paid for and the boundary held. They can frame it however they need to. The important thing is they learned that stating something as tradition or expectation doesn't automatically mean I'll exceed what was actually asked. The power dynamic, I realized, had quietly shifted. Not dramatically, not with conflict or confrontation, but simply through the consistent application of literal compliance. They'd learned that I would do what was asked, but only what was asked. Everything else required conversation.